Americans are weighing in on the Taliban taking over Afghanistan in a new CBS News poll. As the city of Kabul falls to the Taliban, 63% of Americans support removing troops from Afghanistan. However, only 47% approve of President Biden's handling of the situation. This comes as the White House faces backlash at home and new cases of COVID-19 continue to surge across the U.S. Now, here to break down these two very different stories is CBS News Director of Elections and Surveys, Anthony Salvanto. Anthony, how are you?
How are you, Christina? Good to talk to you.
All right, before we talk about Afghanistan, I want to ask you about the news today that the FDA has fully approved that Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine. What can you tell us about how it could affect vaccine hesitancy?
So one of the things we've been tracking in our polling is asking people who are vaccine hesitant why. And you give people a list of reasons, and one of the top ones is concerned about allergies and side effects. But another big one is they say it's still too untested. It's still too unproven. So I think one of the first things you're going to see people say is, well, is that a group? And that's been 50% in polling this summer who at least volunteer that answer. Is that going to be a large enough group or a large group that can be persuaded, some of them anyway, by this? And then the other thing that I'm going to look for, though, is that the same size of people, 50%, have also said it's because they don't trust the government. So the FDA, of course, being a government entity, that may be sort of a counterbalancing effect if they truly don't trust the government to what you see from then the FDA approval. So somewhere in there, you've got that size of a potential movement of 50%. That's probably large. Somewhere in there, you're going to have mistrust of government. But the other dynamic we're going to watch here is whether or not people's individual experiences, their individual doctors, can help persuade them. And maybe there's an indirect effect there, because it's been about 1 in 10 who have said that they might be persuaded if somebody local, if somebody they know and trust could potentially persuade them. And then the other point I would add, and I think Alex just spoke very well to this, and that is what happens when it becomes a requirement for more and more people. We have seen in the polling just out of California last week, where they instituted many of them, that vaccine mandates are by and large popular, especially among the already vaccinated. Once those things go into place and people are feeling like they need to get one, that could have an impact as well.
And Anthony, when it comes to Afghanistan, we've touched on the discontent from some Americans about how the withdrawal is playing out. What trends are you seeing from the American public?
Yeah, okay, so shifting gears here, let me show you this slide, Christina, and the big point to go into this with is people can distinguish between desire to remove troops and desire to withdraw from Afghanistan, which most people do want, and the way that it's being handled, which overwhelmingly they say has gone badly. Let me start on that point. Very badly is your plurality answer here. Most people saying very badly or somewhat badly in what they have seen. Now, you then look at what I mentioned about support for withdrawing troops. That is still a majority. It is down, but in polling you would expect that. So you follow up and you ask people, okay, if you disapprove of removing troops, why is that? And the bulk of people here say because of the way it was handled. So again, it's that execution of what they want that they're not happy with. And I would call you back to something you mentioned at the top, because it's so important, and that is that gap between support for removing troops and how they rate the president's handling of this, which is considerably lower, Christina.
And there have also been these heartbreaking images out of the airport as people attempt to flee Taliban control. I mean, I've personally spoken to multiple families who've gone to the airports with their children, with 11-month-olds, with toddlers, and they simply can't get in through the gate. How are Americans responding? Are Americans responding to these images?
Yeah, and we appreciate your great reporting on that. And what we've seen in terms of public opinion is that large majorities say that the U.S. has to help, starting with the Afghans who have helped the U.S., working as translators, as you've noted, working with the U.S. troops and in intelligence. In fact, it's not just a big majority, but I've got to emphasize this is cutting across party lines. And I will tell you, from doing enough polls, you do not see a lot of support that crosses party lines for just about anything these days. But this does. Republicans Democrats, independents, all saying the U.S. should help. And then also one more point to that, which is that at present, people don't think that the U.S. is doing enough to help Afghan citizens who are trying to flee. So this is going to be a really critical measure to watch now coming out of the president's additional statements on this and the actions that the administration is taking going forward this week, Christina.
It's good to have those numbers to back it up because, you know, we are hearing bipartisan outpouring of support and outrage in almost equal measure. So it's crucial that, you know, we have more than anecdotal data to tell us what's really going on. As you look at all these numbers, how is it impacting President Biden's approval rating? And do you think that impact will continue as we get farther and farther away out of the fall of Kabul?
Yeah, in a word, negatively. Let me show you a couple of slides that will help you illustrate that. First of all, here's his overall approval rating in our polling, which had been in the low 60s right after the inaugural and then into the 50s, and then it's dropped now to 50%. So that's an 8-point drop. Now it's even. In context, that is a substantial drop, that 8 points, especially in today's hyper-partisan environment. And what is driving that? Well, a couple of things. Number one is Afghanistan, but you look behind that and how this might have ripple effects on other ways people rate the president. His ratings for particular things, competent, being focused, being effective in his actions, all of those have seen declines. So one of the things you watch in ratings of presidents is when a particular action or a particular policy that people do not approve of, how does that then accrue to larger views of him? And there we've seen all those specific numbers start to go down. And that's a key thing to watch going forward, if maybe he can get that back up or if they stay down, Christina.
All right, Anthony, I'm going to make you switch gears yet again, and let's talk about COVID. Kids are heading back to school. Yeah. For some, it's the first time in person since the start of the pandemic. How are parents feeling about this?
Well, look, it's all related, right? They're all things that we as a society are dealing with right now. So let me show you a couple of slides about parents. First of all, it starts with concern. And you see a majority of parents say that they are at least somewhat concerned about the prospect of their kids potentially contracting coronavirus at school. Now, when you talk about concern, then that goes into what policy do you want? That's how that gets manifested. And there's a 20-odd point gap between parents who think that masks ought to be required and those who think that they ought to be optional. That gap is driven related a lot to partisanship. And this is something, for context, that we have seen throughout our polling on COVID. These partisan splits where you see Republicans who have been much more resistant to the idea of mandates, mask mandates, vaccine mandates, but underlying that is just less concern about the virus generally among people who ID as Republicans and comparably much more among Democrats. So yes, we're getting party breaks and we're getting partisan breaks even on things like these mask mandates, and you're seeing that play out in school boards, you're seeing that play out across the states, Christina.
Anthony Salvanto with all the numbers we needed. Thank you so much.
Thanks.